The crowd is still on its feet when she walks off stage. Joan Rivers has just finished another explosive night of comedy. Her voice slightly scratchy, but her energy sharper than ever. She is in her 80s, yet she moves like someone decades younger, pacing the dressing room with the same restless force that made her a star in the first place. A fan stops her in the hallway. Joan smiles, poses for a picture, compliments his outfit, then jokes about needing to be up early. "My voice is acting up," she says. "I'm going in for a little procedure tomorrow. No big deal." To Joan, it truly wasn't. She had lived her entire life under bright lights, sharp criticism, cosmetic procedures, public reinvention, private heartbreak, and the constant pressure of staying relevant. A simple throat check, it barely registered on her radar. She leaves the theater glowing. The performance was strong, the audience loved her. She laughs through dinner with her longtime friend Jay Redak, talking about upcoming shows, the next episode of Fashion Police, and the schedule she will never admit is exhausting. Nothing about her demeanor suggests fear. Nothing hints at danger. If anything, Joan seems unstoppable, larger than life, louder than the city that raised her, and still driven by the same hunger that carried her from tiny clubs in Manhattan to global stardom. But beneath the jokes and bravado, there is one thing she cannot ignore: her voice. It has been rougher than usual, gravelly, in a way she finds unsettling. Joan lived through the cruelty of the entertainment industry. She knew the value of a voice. And in a world where she fought for every scrap of respect, losing that voice was unthinkable. So she booked a routine upper endoscopy, a 10-minute look inside her throat and esophagus. A procedure performed thousands of times a month in small clinics across the country. She walks into Yorkville endoscopy the next morning wearing full makeup, hair perfectly styled, ready to be seen even when she's supposed to be unconscious. That was Joan. Always prepared, always polished, always performing. Staff note her vital signs: blood pressure steady, pulse calm, oxygen at 100%. Her medical history is surprisingly clean for someone her age. No smoking, no alcohol abuse, no chronic illness. Just a beta blocker for blood pressure and a lifetime of cosmetic procedures that left her looking like she had outsmarted time itself. By every medical standard, Joan Rivers is a low-risk patient. She signs the consent forms for one procedure, an upper gastrointestinal endoscopy, performed by the clinic's medical director, Dr. Lawrence Cohen. But she did not sign approval for anything else. And that single detail, that one boundary, will become the first crack in a chain of irreversible events. Inside Procedure Room 1, she is sedated with propofol, the same powerful anesthetic used in operating rooms across the world. But Joan is not fully unconscious. This is light sedation. Her reflexes are still active. She is breathing on her own. Then something happens that should not have happened. Instead of beginning the scheduled endoscopy, Joan's personal ear, nose and throat physician, Dr. Gwen Corovin, inserts a slender fiber optic scope through Joan's nose and down toward her vocal cords. It is a laryngoscopy, a procedure with its own risks, a procedure requiring its own consent, a procedure Dr. Corovin is not authorized to perform in this clinic. Witnesses later testify that Joan never approved this, yet there it is. The scope passes deeper. And for the first time, Joan's oxygen levels begin to fall, not drastically, not alarmingly, but enough for the anesthesiologist Dr. Renee Bankula to notice. The official procedure has not even begun. Dr. Cohen eventually starts the endoscopy, sliding his own scope down Joan's throat. He documents a large hiatal hernia and swelling near the vocal cords, findings that could easily explain her hoarseness. At this point, everything should have stopped. The team had the answers they needed, but the room does not stop. Despite the drop in oxygen, despite Joan's blood pressure beginning to slip, despite swelling around the vocal cords, Dr. Corovin wants another look. And according to witnesses, Dr. Cohen raises his phone and photographs Joan's throat during the procedure. a moment later described as unprofessional, distracting, and disturbingly out of place. Then, without authorization, consent, or medical necessity, a second laryngoscopy begins. Joan's body reacts. Her oxygen continues to fall. Her pulse slows, her blood pressure drops, her airway grows irritated, and in that delicate space, the larynx, irritation is dangerous, especially in a lightly sedated patient whose reflexes are fully intact. When the scope touches her vocal cords, the airway snaps shut in a violent reflex known as laryngospasm. Air stops completely. The staff attempts to ventilate her with a mask. Nothing goes in. They attempt to open her airway. The cords remain sealed. Within seconds, Joan's brain begins running out of oxygen. Her pulse weakens. Her blood pressure collapses. And then it happens. Cardiac arrest. The team begins compressions. Adrenaline is injected. Her pulse flickers back, but her airway is still closed. The attempt to place a breathing tube fails. Another attempt fails, and another. The swelling is too severe. The cords are too tight. The anatomy too distorted from repeated scoping. Minute after minute slips away. There is one procedure that could bypass the obstruction: a tracheostomy, a direct opening in the neck that can save a life when the upper airway is blocked. The anesthesiologist later says she considered it, but she does not perform it. Instead, for nearly 19 minutes, the medical team struggles to give Joan Rivers something as basic as oxygen. Her brain, deprived of that oxygen, begins to suffer damage that cannot be undone. By the time the breathing tube finally passes, Joan's body is fighting to survive. Blood pressure skyrocketing, pulse racing, oxygen still far too low, brain slipping deeper into crisis. Paramedics arrive. She is rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital. It has been less than an hour since she walked into the clinic, and nothing will ever be the same. They wheel her through the emergency bay doors at Mount Sinai Hospital, a flurry of motion around a body that is fighting to hold on. Joan Rivers is unresponsive, deeply unconscious, her airway now secured, but her brain already struggling from the prolonged starvation of oxygen. The medical team moves quickly. Ventilation is stabilized. Blood pressure is controlled. Scans begin. But nothing can erase what has already happened inside her skull. For the moment, there is a fragile sense of hope. The staff places her in a medically induced coma, a protective measure meant to reduce swelling in the brain. Melissa Rivers arrives soon after, rushing from Los Angeles, still in disbelief. Hours earlier, she had spoken to her mother, heard her energy, her plans, her excitement about upcoming shows. Now, Melissa stands at her mother's bedside, gripping her hand, whispering to a woman who cannot respond. Doctors explain the situation in cautious terms. Joan's brain has been deprived of oxygen for too long. The extent of the damage will take time to evaluate. But among the endless hum of machines, the truth begins to take shape. Over the next 3 days, test after test reveals the same pattern: widespread, irreversible damage, a condition known as global anoxic injury. It occurs when the brain is deprived of oxygen long enough that cells begin to die in massive numbers, shutting down entire regions responsible for memory, movement, awareness, and life. Melissa stays by her mother's side every hour. Friends visit quietly, stunned, refusing to accept what the charts tell them. How could a simple outpatient procedure lead to this? Joan had faced tragedy before. The loss of her husband, the collapse of her talk show, the moments when her career fell apart. She survived each one through sheer willpower, through work, through determination that bordered on defiance. But this was something even she could not fight. By the 4th day, the neurologists deliver the news that no family ever wants to hear. Joan Rivers is not recovering. Her brain has sustained catastrophic injury. There is no path back. Melissa reflects on her mother's own words, words spoken consistently throughout her life. Joan had always been clear. She never wanted to live trapped in a body that no longer functioned, reliant on machines, unable to speak, think, or perform. And so, honoring those wishes, Melissa makes the most painful decision of her life. On the afternoon of September 4th, Joan Rivers is removed from life support. Surrounded by love, she takes her final breath at 1:17 p.m. She was 81 years old. Her death sends shockwaves through the entertainment world. Tributes flood in from comedians, actors, fans, and colleagues who recognize not only her talent, but the barriers she shattered for women in comedy. Yet even amid the grief, questions intensify. What exactly happened in that procedure room? Why did a routine endoscopy spiral into a fatal emergency? The answers would come, but not immediately. Melissa Rivers, following Jewish tradition, initially objected to a full autopsy. Still, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner performed a thorough examination, external and internal, to determine the precise cause of death. The findings were stark. Official cause of death: anoxic encephalopathy due to hypoxic arrest. In simple terms, Joan Rivers died because her brain was deprived of oxygen after her airway closed and her heart stopped. The chain reaction: identified. Oxygen supply to the brain dropped dramatically, blood pressure collapsed, cardiac arrest followed. Resuscitation was delayed by difficulty securing the airway. The interval without oxygen caused irreversible brain damage. But one detail in the autopsy report stands out. The manner of death is classified as a therapeutic complication. Not homicide, not natural causes, not suicide, and not medical error, at least not formally. Therapeutic complication means Joan's death occurred as a known, predictable risk of a medical procedure. But to understand why the classification does not absolve the clinic, we need to return to the timeline. Joan consented to one procedure. She received 3. 2 of them, the laryngoscopies performed by Dr. Gwen Corrivan, were never authorized. They were not part of the planned care. And according to multiple eyewitnesses, they were performed in a clinic where Dr. Corrivan was not cleared to operate at all. When Joan's oxygen levels dropped, the procedure continued. When her blood pressure fell, the procedure continued. When swelling increased around her vocal cords, the procedure continued. These moments are the center of every forensic analysis. At 9:28 a.m., when the second unauthorized laryngoscopy reportedly began, Joan's airway may have reacted in the worst possible way, snapping shut through laryngospasm. Because she was lightly sedated, her protective reflexes were fully active. Her vocal cords closed, sealing off the incoming air. The anesthesiologist's attempts to ventilate her failed. Repeated intubation attempts failed. For nearly 19 minutes, Joan was without effective oxygenation. 19 minutes is an eternity inside the human brain. Under ideal conditions, irreversible brain damage can begin after only 4 minutes without oxygen. After 10 minutes, survival without severe neurological deficit becomes increasingly unlikely. Joan went 19. A tracheostomy, a direct airway created through the neck, could have bypassed the obstruction. Dr. Bankula later said she considered performing one, but it was never done. This gap and that stretch of 19 minutes is the silent center of this tragedy. It is the time during which Joan Rivers slipped away. In the weeks that followed, the New York State Department of Health launched an investigation into Yorkville endoscopy. The medical director, Dr. Lawrence Cohen, was removed from his position. Internal reviews revealed multiple violations of standard protocol. Melissa Rivers filed a medical negligence lawsuit detailing the unauthorized procedures, the failure to maintain airway control, and the series of decisions that directly contributed to her mother's death. The defendants denied wrongdoing, The case ultimately reached a settlement, but no legal document, no financial resolution, no official report could fully explain the deeper question: how does a woman who survived the brutality of show business, who reinvented herself again and again, who faced public humiliation, private loss, and the relentless pressure of fame, lose her life in a 10-minute procedure designed to diagnose nothing more than a raspy voice? Joan Rivers lived unapologetically. She worked until the final week of her life. She shaped modern comedy. She was sharp, flawed, brilliant, and relentlessly driven. But in the end, what ended her life was not age, illness, or fate. It was a series of preventable moments, decisions made inside a procedure room that should have been routine. The autopsy tells the medical truth. The timeline tells the forensic truth, and together they reveal a story as tragic as it is shocking. A legendary voice, silenced not by time, but by oxygen that never reached her brain. This is what happened. This is what the evidence shows. This is the story, and the full forensic story, of how Joan Rivers died.